What to Do When Empathy is a Sin. That is the title of a recent essay available on the Church of Satan website. I'll be offering my thoughts on the article as somebody who has actually read it beyond the headline, and reading email from somebody who seemingly did not.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain. Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M here with Satansplain. This episode of Satansplain is going to be a little different because I just want to use the time to respond to one email I got. That will be pretty much what the episode is going to focus on. Because it's an email I got that is so loaded, I'm going to spend the first half of the episode just on what it gets wrong, just on the surface. Then in the second half of the show, I'm going to talk about the topic that the email was trying to address. As always, in the description of this episode, you should find timestamps to fast forward or rewind if you want to. You know, like if I'm telling you something you already know. But I do recommend listening to the whole thing, so let's get on to the email. Jordan writes, "Good day. I've been following your podcast for some time, and I've found it consistently valuable, particularly in how it addresses misrepresentations of Satanism and reasserts the core philosophy codified by Anton LaVeyan." Okay, great email so far. I'm glad he likes the show. Next paragraph in the email. "I consider myself a Satanist, though I am not currently a member of the Church of Satan." Okay, that's fine. Continuing. "I've been deliberating on whether to join, but a persistent concern has held me back. The presence of essays on the official website that, in my view, directly contradict LaVeyan Satanism." All right, before we go further, let's pause right there. The term LaVeyan Satanism is a misnomer. I've pointed this out on the show a few times before. Perhaps Jordan missed those episodes. So to quickly recap, the name of the religion codified and established by Anton LaVeyan is called Satanism. So the term LaVeyan Satanism is redundant. It's a phrase that was invented, so far as I know, by journalists and the like who want to justify using the label of Satanism on things that are not Satanism. People who worship a literal devil and sacrifice animals, for example, are not Satanists, and the thing that they're practicing is not Satanism. People who send their money to Kevin Soling and dress up in black robes for political stunts just to bait and harass Christians, well, they are not Satanists either. Likewise, people who practice different occult religions like Luciferianism, Thelema, Setianism, and so on are not Satanists. There is no rational reason to consider all of these groups to be different denominations of the same religion. None. See Satansplain episode number 71 for more on that. So, while I know that some Satanists think that by saying LaVeyan Satanism or LaVeyan Satanist, they're avoiding confusion, but the reality is they're only adding to it. You should not be saying, well, I'm this kind of Satanist and not that other kind of Satanist. No, you should be saying, no, I'm a Satanist, and this is what Satanism is. Those other people you're talking about have next to nothing in common with us as religion, besides wearing pentagrams, maybe, so there's no reason to call them Satanists. So as I've said before, the so-called theistic Satanist is not a Satanist, just a devil worshiper with a vocabulary problem. Okay, now that I've got that out of the way, let's continue with Jordan's email. "I understand that the church allows for a range of personal opinions on political and social matters. However, such tolerance should not extend to the dilution or revision of satanic philosophy itself." Okay, I agree. "When members begin to frame Satanism as compatible with ideologies fundamentally at odds with LaVeyan's work..." Okay. Pause right here. This I all agree with in and of itself, but of course, when I first read this, it was right after I made episode number 90. And, that was where I read the essay on Satanism and racialism. So When I read this email and got this far, naturally my immediate thought was, uh-oh, I think I know what's next. Yep, I did that episode 90 of Satansplain where I finished with an essay on Satanism and racialism, and even responded to another listener who identified as a white racialist and asked if that was incompatible with Satanism, and I answered all of that as thoroughly and objectively as I possibly could, which means I did not outright condemn it and run with the sentiment of punch a Nazi, go out and punch a Nazi today, kill all fascists, and so on. Which means, this is what I'm thinking in my mind, I probably pissed off some ultra left-wing listener, because after all, not surprisingly, after that episode was announced on the Church of Satan channels, I saw the usual Church of Satan haters out there complaining again that the Church of Satan is fascist, and, oh, look, remember this book review Peter Gilmore gave of a neo-Nazi's book back in 1993, and this proves it, and reposts of, oh, look at this video that shows LaVeyan wasn't a true LGBT ally, and reposts of, oh, look at this politically incorrect social Darwinist stuff the Church of Satan believes. So, all right, I'm thinking, okay, let me brace myself here for yet another one of those. Back to the email. However, such tolerance, is what the email says, should not extend to the dilution or revision of satanic philosophy itself. When members begin to frame Satanism as compatible with ideologies fundamentally at odds with LaVeyan's work, such as contemporary humanist or progressive values, under the banner of personal interpretation, and these views are published under official endorsement, it ceases to be a matter of private opinion. It becomes institutional misrepresentation. Oh, okay. My mistake. I had this completely wrong. This isn't one of those complaints that the Church of Satan is too right-wing. This is one of those complaints that the Church of Satan is too left-wing. Continuing with the email. Given that your podcast rightly focuses on clarifying what Satanism is and isn't, I believe this kind of internal distortion warrants just as much scrutiny as external misconceptions. Corruption of the philosophy is far more likely to come from within than from critics outside the organization. All right, let's pause here again and review this for a moment. This guy, Jordan, who is not a Church of Satan member himself, thinks that our organization is a victim of internal distortion, that the organization is officially publishing and endorsing, quote, humanist or progressive values, and that these go against Satanism. And the person he's trying to convince is me, a magister in the Church of Satan who's been in the organization for over 20 years. I'm certainly not left-wing or humanist, and just did an episode on Satansplain exploring the taboo right-wing topic of racialism and Satanism, which was advertised on official Church of Satan channels. Now, I'm not throwing my magister title around here as some suggested proof that I'm automatically correct, and that, because I'm a Church of Satan clergy member, that this makes me correct. No, that may be how other religions work, but that's not how Satanism works. My point here is that this already comes off as so Dunning-Kruger effect. Always fun when somebody comes to try to Satansplain the Church of Satan to Satansplain. Continuing with the email. There is also little excuse for letting these misalignments pass unchallenged today. Okay, apparently he thinks that nobody in the Church of Satan ever discusses or debates things internally, but all right, well, let's read the rest of his email. Surely he has some proof of what he's saying, right? With the tools currently available, including AI capable of rapidly analyzing text for doctrinal consistency, it is entirely feasible to perform the kind of rigorous philosophical vetting I have done. That such essays are still being approved and published raises further concerns about the standards being applied internally. I am including a link to a breakdown of the most recent and glaring example of this issue, an essay that claims to honor LaVeyan while attempting to repackage him as a forerunner of inclusivity rhetoric entirely alien to his actual positions. And here he gives a link to ChatGPT. Until this trend is openly addressed and reversed, or at the very least, until such revisionist content is no longer promoted on the Church of Satan's official channels, I won't be applying for membership. The disclaimer that members speak only for themselves is inadequate when their words are being given a platform by the institution tasked with upholding satanic philosophy. Okay, and that's the end of the email. Now, I'll get to the details of what this supposed ChatGPT analysis says, mostly in the second half of the show. And if it's truly a rigorous philosophical vetting, as he puts it. Spoiler, it's not. But let's recap. This guy used one AI tool to look at one recent churchofsatan.com essay. The AI tool, it somehow said it was at odds with LaVeyan in a way that was too politically left-wing or progressive or what have you. But he didn't bring this to me to ask, hey, Bill, I read this essay, and I think it contradicts Satanism for this list of reasons. Like, I mean, doesn't it? Would you agree, disagree? That would have been fine. That would have been a valid question. But no. He says this is an infiltration in the organization, which he doesn't belong to, and congratulates himself on being a super sleuth detective for using an AI tool on one essay written by a Church of Satan hierarchy member in good standing, I might add. And then threatens me that he might not join us unless this problem is rectified. Okay, if you need ChatGPT to analyze the Church of Satan website for thought crime to decide if you want to join, and then, as if that wasn't silly enough, demand that we change whatever it was you found, or rather ChatGPT found and didn't like, or else you won't join us? Well, just don't fucking join. Why would we want you? If you're acting like this much of a baby over one article, which you couldn't even bother to read yourself but needed a tool to try to explain it to you, then what else from satanic literature have you been too lazy to read? Apparently, this guy also missed episode number 1 of Satansplain, where I say that Satanism is an RTFM religion. And to address this claim that there's some trend of anti-satanic progressive humanist values causing internal distortion in the Church of Satan, and they keep being posted without any kind of scrutiny, well, first of all, again, how would he know nobody else reviewed it? Does he think we just post any essays on churchofsatan.com without anybody reviewing them? But he is talking more specifically about the essay on empathy written by Witch Autumn Sword. If you go to the news feed on churchofsatan.com, you will see that, yes, mention of the essay was announced on the news feed, besides the essay itself being hosted on the website. But with that announcement in the news feed, what was the item promoted right before it? How about right after it? Well, the news piece posted right before it was an interview with Warlock Robert Shirley, host of the Neutral Wisdom podcast. I listened to that interview, and he talks about being proud to be a man, being proud to be a father, being an entrepreneur. He was promoting his book, and in the intro of that book, Magister Robert Johnson describes Warlock Robert as, quote, he has taken the philosophy and the guidelines of what makes a man, and more importantly, a man among men who shuns herd mentality, doesn't kneel to political correctness or the latest fad, and has created his own path to become his own god as professed by LaVeyan himself. Men like Shirley run with the ball. Now, does that sound left-wing to you? It doesn't sound that way to me. And again, that was the item in the news feed just before the empathy essay. You know what the item was in the news feed right after the essay? It was the announcement of Satansplain episode number 90, the one on racialism and Satanism. So again, where is this supposed constant left-wing trend happening on the COS news channels? As for the essay that Jordan is complaining about, I'll get to that in the second half, the ChatGPT response is 15 pages long. So I'm not going to read you the entire essay and then read that entire thing word for word. But as long as we're playing the AI game here, I decided to go to Grok, which is the AI tool of X, formerly Twitter. And I asked Grok, what are some examples of left-wing bias found in links or articles shared in 2025 on official Church of Satan channels? Grok's response began with this: there is no direct evidence from available sources showing explicit left-wing bias in links or articles shared by the Church of Satan's official channels in 2025. The Church of Satan maintains a policy of political neutrality, emphasizing individual liberty and personal responsibility over collective political ideologies, as outlined in the 2018 statement. This policy highlights that members hold diverse political views, ranging from libertarians to socialists to conservatives, and the organization avoids endorsing specific political positions. And so that's what Grok told me. All of that, by the way, was something I covered a while back on episode number 5 of Satansplain, Satanism and Politics. So as I think I mentioned, the essay that Jordan here had ChatGPT analyze is titled, What to Do When Empathy is a Sin. I would encourage all of you to do what I did, and that is read the essay for yourself. If you don't like it, that's fine. It's not like all of us members of the Church of Satan have to treat every essay ever written by every member as some sort of spiritual dogma that can never be questioned and has to be 100% accepted. But if you do read it for yourself, you will have done more than what Jordan apparently did. In fact, allow me to go off on a side rant here, as if I haven't been doing that already. As always, if you want to skip ahead, you can find the chapter breaks in the episode description. But, okay, here's my rant. We Satanists are all Satanists not because we just like the title and we think it's cool and edgy and we want to slap the label on something unrelated without caring about the whole ideology under that name. Now, there are people who mistreat the label of Satanist like that for themselves, and we refer to those sorts of people as pseudo-Satanists. Throwing the label of an established religion on an unrelated belief system is not creating a new denomination of that religion. It's just being ignorant. There is an entire established religion called Satanism. The principles of that are best summarized in the book, The Satanic Bible, and our convictions match what is described in there. Now, notice I said best summarized. I didn't say we treat the Satanic Bible as an infallible source of cosmic truth bestowed upon us by some magical deity. I run into people now and then, you see, who try to argue, well, Satanism is anything you want it to be, and if you try to say otherwise, you're being a gatekeeper, and then you're being dogmatic just like Christian fundamentalists, and you're treating the Satanic Bible like they treat the Holy Bible. No, this is a stupid misconception based on the false dichotomy of thinking that the only options in life are either blind acceptance and obedience to authoritative rules, or a solipsistic life of believing and doing everything on an impulsive whim. And as I've said many times before, Satanism is not simply whatever you want it to be. We need to have at least some degree of structure to distinguish what is Satanism from what is not Satanism, or otherwise, the word would be pretty meaningless. At the same time, having structure doesn't mean there's no room for different wordings of the same idea or different personal applications of it. I start every episode of Satansplain with my own 30-second description of Satanism to always make it clear what this show is about. Other Satanists may put the description of Satanism in their own words, but still be describing the same sort of thing I describe. Now, let me make an analogy here to illustrate the point that I see a lot of people missing. Not you listeners, of course, but, some of these other people you find online, the people who yell gatekeeper the loudest. Let's say you have several different DVD releases of the same movie. Let's say Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, on the back of the case, there's, usually a short description of what the movie's about. And on these different versions of the DVD, the same movie, the descriptions are all worded differently in different releases. But anybody with half a brain can read those descriptions and get the idea of what the movie's about Maybe some versions do a better job than others of describing what the movie is about. But just because there is no single definitive correct way to describe Raiders of the Lost Ark does not mean that every description is valid and accurate. If I say Raiders of the Lost Ark is a movie starring Judy Garland as a farm girl from Kansas named Dorothy, who is swept up in a cyclone with her dog Toto to a magical land where she meets a talking scarecrow, and no. If I say that, I'm obviously not describing Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I would be stupid if I tried to hide behind the argument of, well, even if the official DVD releases of Raiders of the Lost Ark can't agree on an exact description, and so my description is as valid as those others. No, that's just stupid. So to the people who can't understand this concept, I don't know what else to tell them. Their solipsism is off the charts. Anyway, I've gotten ahead of myself with a side rant there, as I forewarned you I would, because I think it's something that still needs to be said now and then. Getting back to this complaint about the essay, it seems we have the opposite problem, which we see from time to time from certain people who consider themselves Satanists, but then run into Satanists who may have opposing views on different subjects, and they just can't seem to handle this observation. Now, to be clear, when I say opposing views, again, I'm not talking about pseudo-Satanists. I'm not talking about people from completely different belief systems who've erroneously taken up the label of Satanist, like devil worshippers and so on. No, what I mean are the people who seem to understand the bulk of the Satanic Bible and feel that Satanism is the path for them, but then they make the mistake of thinking that their personal manifestations of Satanism in their lives, or their observations of the world through a satanic lens, or their lives' priorities, their life priorities must all be the only way to satanically do things. So, for example, I have run across a few people in Satanism forums over the years who say, well, I'm a Satanist, and Satanism is about being your own god, therefore the only proper career for a Satanist is to be an entrepreneur and own your own business and not have to take orders from anybody. And yeah, some Satanists do have that as a career, but we can look around and find Satanists who don't really have a desire to run their own business and may have very successful careers working for, say, a law firm or in the military or in a laboratory. They love what they're doing. They're passionate about what they're doing. They excel at what they're doing. So what's the problem? I don't see one. Or to use another example, I'll see somebody who says, I'm a Satanist and I champion indulgence and making the most out of the one life I have, but cigarettes and alcohol taste disgusting and are scientifically proven to be harmful to your health, so anybody who smokes or drinks can't be a true Satanist. Okay, and yet I've met Satanists who partake in those things, fully accepting the risks and all that, of course. I suppose if you have a friend who's smoking or drinking and it's reached dangerous, compulsive levels, then that can certainly be anti-satanic, and you may want to give him or her an intervention. But if there are Satanists who happen to enjoy smoking or drinking, what do you care? Personally, I think beer is disgusting, but I don't go harassing other Satanists who think otherwise. Magister Nemo wrote a whole essay about beer in his book. I disagreed with it, but I didn't whine and say he was somehow less of a Satanist for his take on the topic, or that he was misrepresenting Satanism, and only my view of beer is the correct one. So once again, this doesn't therefore mean that Satanism is simply anything you want it to be. It's a false dichotomy to assume that the only two options are absolute control over all Satanist behavior or anything goes. Now, there's a reason why the 9 satanic sins include things like counterproductive pride and especially solipsism. So if you haven't guessed by now, I feel the reaction to this article is more along the lines of that kind of behavior I was just describing. Well, let's take a break. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Have you ever used a public toilet and noticed one of those dirty poems scrawled on the wall? Aren't they great? If you thought that sick shit was funny, you're gonna love this book series, Poems from the Bathroom Wall. These original poems are written in the same style and cover the same subject matter. Look these books up on lulu.com, that's LULU.com, and make sure that your filters are set to allow explicit content. Poems from the Bathroom Wall. Indulgence for the lowbrow connoisseur.
The Satanic Scriptures hands down the wit, wisdom, and diabolical perspective of the Church of Satan's High Priest, Magus Peter H. Gilmore. These essays, articles, and diatribes have been collected from over 20 years of the High Priest's writings for his infernal cabal, some first issued in the pages of publications available only to insiders. From the magic of toys to techniques of time travel, Magus Gilmore leads the reader down a left-hand path where few will find what they expect. Magus Gilmore reveals principles of satanic ritual in a frank discussion of forbidden rites. What is a satanic funeral? How do Satanists marry? Find out now, as these unholy ceremonies have never been disclosed outside of the Church of Satan's hellish hierarchy. Here is the philosophy for those bold enough to be their own gods or devils.
Visit thesatanicscriptures.com for more information. Released by Scapegoat Publishing. Available in paperback form from major booksellers and independents nationwide.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you are on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, whatever the equivalent is on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you're listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode. For all questions and correspondence, email me directly. The email address is bill@satansplain.com. And if you enjoy Satansplain and would like to support the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Point your web browsers to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. That is the best way you can support Satansplain. Though we also have a merch store. You can go to store.satansplain.com for that. And thank you, as always, to all of you who support the show in one way or another. Well, enough of the side rants. We spent half of the episode on that. Let me talk about the essay. When I first saw this essay, What to Do When Empathy is a Sin, I will admit my expectations were not high. My first thought was, oh, that essay title. I see empathy used as such a buzzword these days, especially by egalitarians and these hippie types. It's, in fact, one of the words the Satanic Temple is always thrown around to virtue signal, or at least trick Christians into attacking something that sounds virtuous. So I hope the essay isn't that kind of bullshit. Well, let me just read the article for myself instead of jumping to conclusions over a headline. So I started to read it. And I thought, I don't really like the initial tone of this article, but let me just keep reading it. So it starts off with a quote from Anton LaVey in an interview with Rolling Stone that was done back in the early 90s, I think. And the quote was, "It's not easy being evil in a world that's gone to hell." Then the essay goes on to mention a recent book by Christian pastor Joe Rigney, a book titled The Sin of Empathy. And in this book, he basically argues that, oh, sure, compassion is Christ-like and all that, but it's possible to be too compassionate, and that we see certain industries or activist groups weaponizing people's empathy, and basically in the form of guilt tripping, or also what we Satanists would call good guy badges. And of course, as a Satanist, I am in agreement with this sentiment in and of itself. This idea that, it's stupid to always be self-sacrificing and blindly believing that believing anybody who says that, the pain they're suffering is real, must be speaking the truth and automatically drop everything and help them and so on. Now, you can read the whole chapter in the Satanic Bible on Psychic Vampires to show you just a great example of why that doesn't line up with Satanism. But you see, this pastor who wrote this book is saying, at least in part, that the real problem with doing that is you might end up doing things that ultimately go against Christianity or make you abandon your Christianity. And let's face it, we've all met some hardcore Christian or another who uses the Bible to justify some not so compassionate behavior to other people. Of course, what I find ironic about this whole Sin of Empathy book is that Christianity itself is based on the idea that God made the ultimate sacrifice by taking on a human form and getting crucified. And 2,000 plus years later, you should give your full empathy to that. Well, to quote a rhetorical question from Jim Huger, I think his name was Jay Huger, who he went by. He made a website back in the 90s, and he had these pamphlets. One was called Questions for Bible Thumpers. And the rhetorical question is, why did God sacrifice himself to correct a mistake he made himself? Anyway, regardless, I kept reading the essay on churchofsatan.com, and my impression of where the essay goes with this next is to say, if to put it in my own words, hey, as long as we've reached this point where, outrage against scapegoats seems to be in vogue, where everybody has a social media account and an itchy trigger finger, and a point when even Christian pastors are writing books that call empathy a sin. Well, in light of all this, why not stop and think of some satanic takes on all this? All right, so that was the impression I got from reading, the beginning of the article. So I kept reading. I read the essay to the end, and my assessment of all that was, okay, I get the overall point that which Autumn is making in this essay, I think. Yes, we Satanists have no shame in showing disgust to people who deserve nothing but our disgust and condemnation. And as she points out, we make that abundantly clear. We embrace anger as part of the 7 deadly sins. We open the Satanic Bible with the infernal diatribe. We have the conjuration of destruction. We have satanic statements such as Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek, along with lines like rejecting love wasted on ingrates or concern for psychic vampires. Many of us Satanists might describe ourselves as misanthropes, maybe even in a giddy way. We say, if a guest in your lair annoys you, treat him cruelly and without mercy. We say, lex talionis. We say, if he does not stop, then destroy him. Yeah. All of that is indeed Satanism. As Witch Autumn sums it up, Satanism is no stranger to cruelty. But here is where we get into the crux of the article. Are those things I just described the only sort of behavior found in being a Satanist? The answer, of course, is no. Because besides the conjuration of destruction, we also have the conjuration of compassion. In that fourth satanic statement that I mentioned, the first half says, as Autumn herself points out in the essay, kindness to those who deserve it. We say, when in another's lair, show respect or don't go there. We say, when walking in open territory, bother no one. So the notion of empathy, for perhaps lack of a better word, is not antithetical to Satanism in and of itself. The Satanic Bible has a whole chapter on love and hate. This is not pacifism or turning the other cheek. If it were, then all the other stuff I mentioned about vengeance and anger a minute ago, well, that wouldn't be in the book either. So what the essay is saying here, at least to me, is not, oh, look how kind and virtuous we are. No, that's the good guy badge, which I covered in another episode. No, the message I get from the essay is, hey, there's nothing wrong in Satanism with being courteous to strangers, at least by default. If instead you're cutting off people in traffic when you're driving, or never tipping a waitress, or you're tossing litter onto the ground, then you're not some cool Satanist who is avoiding conformity or being your own god. You're just being an irresponsible jackass. Now, it's still true that Satanism is a self-serving religion, but there's nothing satanic about acting solipsistic on impulse without any foresight. That's stupidity, another satanic sin. And can you at least see how concepts like common courtesy or respecting another's lair, such as, their business or their personal space, can ultimately be in your own self-interest? Paradoxically enough. To quote the article, "Cruelty for its own sake is unbecoming. It's also a quick way to find yourself 6 feet under if you piss off enough people or the wrong people." So that is the gist of the article as I saw it. Again, you could always read it for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Now, what conclusions did ChatGPT come to when explicitly asked to analyze the article for parts that align with Satanism and parts that don't align? Well, instead of reading you the entire thing, again, where it takes the entire essay and comments on it one paragraph at a time, I'm just going to jump down to where it claims it contradicts Satanism. And of course, ChatGPT ignorantly refers to all of this as LaVeyan Satanism. Go figure. Here's the opening paragraph of the original essay, What to Do When Empathy is a Sin. The now infamous Rolling Stone interview with Anton LaVey, Sympathy for the Devil, opens with the line, "It's not easy being evil in a world that's gone to hell." That's a great quote, and one I frequently find myself thinking of as I ingest each daily news cycle. Every morning I wake up to find someone sneering at human rights violations, the rollback of civil liberties, or even derision of the basic concept of treating one another with common courtesy. When cult leaders are bores, and that's B-O-O-R-S, not B-O-R-E-S, rudeness becomes their disciples' religion. This cult of cruelty has perhaps reached its apoplectic apotheosis with the outright demonization of empathy. Christian theologian and rat bastard Joe Rigney wrote a whole book called The Sin of Empathy, calling the so-called virtue of empathy the greatest rhetorical tool of manipulation of the 21st century. Love thy neighbor as thyself, but if thy neighbor needs a hand, he be on his own. So that's the opening paragraph. And what is ChatGPT's claim about it being contradictory to Satanism? Well, it says it diverges significantly when it adopts a tone of moral concern over human rights and empathy, as if they are self-evident goods, implying a moral universalism that LaVeyan Satanism explicitly rejects. All right. First of all, I didn't pick up on an implication of moral universalism, and remember, Jordan was saying that this was a left-wing thing. So are concerns about human rights a left-wing issue? For the record, Witch Autumn Sword and I are fairly opposite ends of the political spectrum. And I'm sure we might have disagreements on what constitutes a human rights violation. And like I said, this article, paradoxically enough, begins with a rather fiery tone. But obviously, as Satanists, she and I still believe in human rights as a general concept, I would think, just for lack of a better term. For example, I believe in the right to defend myself, and that this extends to the right to bear arms. In fact, I just bought 2 new guns and some ammunition this weekend. I also believe in the right of a business owner to pay what they want to their employees and choose not to hire people they don't want to hire. Of course, whatever the consequences that will have on his business is another story. But my point here is that these rights I'm describing are certainly not left-wing talking points. In fact, I get branded as right-wing for just saying some of the things I do. So it seems that ChatGPT missed the tone of the opening paragraph, presumes that as Satanists, none of us are allowed to deal with issues of human rights, even if that involves things that might affect us as individuals, and of course ignores the examples I gave earlier of what role empathy plays in Satanism, even if it's not treated as some ultimate virtue. And throughout this supposed analysis that ChatGPT gives, I see that it keeps making these mistakes. It ignores whatever sarcasm or subtlety is in the article and keeps everything to absolutes, and does it about as bad as your average annoying atheist on Reddit who just wants to play the game of finding isolated quotes for contradictions. Creationists play the same game with, books from Darwin and whatnot. But in fact, a great example is the essay where the essay quotes a scene from the movie Roadhouse. I'll explain what I mean by that great example. But if you've never seen the 1989 movie Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze, well, it's about a bar that has come to have a really dangerous crowd. So an amazing bouncer is brought in, or rather a cooler, a guy who manages the bouncers, the other security, so that they can help get rid of the troublemakers and toss them out of the bar. And there's a great scene early in the film where the cooler, James Dalton, is hired by the owner, and he's lecturing the other bouncers and the staff on how to behave and deal with the rough customers. He says, just to paraphrase this from memory, first rule, never underestimate the troublemaker you're dealing with. Rule 2, take the conflict outside, don't do things in front of the other customers. And 3, be nice. Now, of course, the other bouncers scoff at this idea of being nice, but Dalton explains what he means is be professional. Don't take insults from some drunk personally, for example. It's only a job. Be courteous and walk that drunk out of the bar. If he won't move, get somebody to help move him. But, the cooler adds at the very end, I want you to be nice until it's time to not be nice. And to me, this reflects Satanic Rule of the Earth number 11, which is when walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him. And we see that carried on in the movie as well. Now, here's how it's put in the article. So within the context of the article on churchofsatan.com, we practice kindness to those who deserve it, not love wasted on ingrates. Deciding who deserves it is a matter of personal discretion. However, the 11th Satanic Rule of the Earth suggests treating total strangers with some modicum of respect, or at the very least, not acting like a total asshole unprompted. When you get down to it, the very bare minimum of morality might be summed up, as Patrick Swayze so eloquently said it in the movie Roadhouse, as be nice until it's time to not be nice. Why go out of your way to be cruel or dismissive? If you feel no ethical obligation to help someone, then don't. But at least why not initially be nice? Why mock someone or belittle them? Why crow over the misfortune of someone you don't personally know, who hasn't done anything to you? Why make a show of how lacking in empathy you are? When you're an asshole, the only people who think you're being cool are other assholes. Now that's another quote from the article. How does ChatGPT describe it? It says, this article has a moralistic tone by asking why not initially be nice. This question carries implicit moral obligation incompatible with Satanism's principle of indulgence, not compulsion. If one wants to be courteous, that's valid, but suggesting it as an unprompted behavioral standard undermines the satanic stance that humans must earn your courtesy. All right, then it further goes on to say, the line when you're an asshole, the only people who think you're being cool are other assholes, slips into mainstream social critique and virtue signaling, implying that being disliked by normies is a failure. Yeah, ChatGPT actually used normies. I'm sure it was probably prompted for that before. LaVeyan would disagree. He embraced being feared, hated, and misunderstood when it served personal authenticity. Hello, ChatGPT, are you drunk? That's not what was being said there. It was Satanic Rule of the Earth number 11 with an emphasis on the first part of that, which some people seem to overlook. I wonder if ChatGPT would look at like the behavior of a psychic vampire and say, oh, Satanists say this is okay because Satanism rejects having the average person like you. So why is ChatGPT behaving like this? My guess is that its only understanding of Satanism comes from watered-down news articles that it finds online, maybe at best. And then, of course, takes concepts only at their face value and top surface level and plays the contradiction hunting game. I'm sure it's not all that hard for AI to try to find things that are antonyms. It's pathetic enough that we see humans playing these games with Satanists, but to get a machine to play the same game for you is even more ridiculous. Let me just finish by running through the summary points that ChatGPT gives on what this essay is in conflict with when it comes to Satanism. And once again, remember that Jordan was patting himself on the back for using this AI tool to look at one essay and conclude that this was an indication of the Church of Satan going all left-wing and threatening to not join us unless this was corrected or something. Oh my God, what on earth will we do if Jordan doesn't join the Church of Satan. So ChatGPT's complaints, the summary, there are 7 of them at the bottom. Let's run through these. 1, moral universalism masquerading as Satanism. The essay promotes empathy, kindness, and altruism as inherently virtuous, replacing Satanism's ethic of merit-based interaction with moral prescriptions indistinguishable from secular humanism. All right, well, it doesn't, and I think I already addressed that claim of ChatGPT's in some detail earlier. Let's move on. Number 2, public image obsession. It urges Satanists to behave well so others will, quote, see Satanists as the adults in the room, reducing Satanism to a public relations campaign. LaVeyan Satanism is indifferent to approval and rejects herd validation. So once again, ChatGPT misses the point. There is nothing unsatanic about standing back and being polite while you watch Christians get nuttier and nuttier in public. Being the adult in the room in this context doesn't mean begging for status quo approval. I mean, if the article talked about a Satanist being in a room where people were shitting their pants and the Satanist wasn't, and the Satanist turns to the crowd watching this whole thing saying, yeah, see, I'm not the insane one here. All these other people are shitting their pants and I'm not. So if that happened, would ChatGPT say, oh, well, that's against Satanism because Satanists are for indulgence and don't care what other people think. Therefore, shitting your pants is fine in Satanism, and it's wrong to criticize people who do that. Maybe it would say that. I don't know. Maybe that's not an exaggeration. I don't want to enter it in the ChatGPT and find out. But anyway, I mean, at this point, anything's possible. Complaint number 3 from ChatGPT. Evangelical tone and cultural reformism. The text frames Satanism as a better moral alternative to Christianity, implying it should replace religious ethics by outperforming them. True Satanism is not reformist. It is adversarial, elitist, and unconcerned with converting or pleasing the masses. I guess you could say the essay has a bit of preachy tone to it, but then again, so does some episodes of Satansplain. In any case, the article wasn't saying that we should strive to replace and outperform Christians through some good guy bad contest. And it's not calling for reformation of Satanism itself either. I already gave my interpretation of the essay earlier and what I thought it was saying overall. ChatGPT complaint number 4, and there are 3 more after this. Cruelty, mockery, and social detachment, when justified, are condemned as signs of weakness or insecurity. This reverses satanic ethics, which recognize these behaviors as tools of power, justice, or indulgence. No, the article explicitly even puts the "to those who deserve it" part of the 4th satanic statement in italics for emphasis. It is not condemning justified cruelty from Satanists. ChatGPT complaint number 5. Sanitized Nietzscheanism. It misuses Nietzsche to promote meekness, misreading strength as quiet humility rather than will to power. LaVey embraced Nietzsche's published philosophy of master morality, not the diluted humanist perception offered here. Okay, does the essay do that? No, it doesn't. It uses one quote from Nietzsche about insecure people who try to channel that insecurity into a sense of power by trying to only tear other people down or exploit them for, kind of a cheap psychic vampire thrill, if you will, as opposed to the kind of successful person who is secure in what he does and people find him inspiring instead of just intimidating and loathsome to be around. ChatGPT complaint number 6. The essay shifts focus from self-determined indulgence to performative virtue. Again, bullshit, and I already addressed why. Finally, let's just finish with point number 7 here. 7th and final complaint. Redefinition of Satanism for cultural acceptance. By positioning Satanists as secretly noble, empathetic actors in society, the essay attempts to rehabilitate Satanism into something palatable. Which, like claim number 6, is bullshit. This was not an essay on trying to make Satanism palatable to the masses as a religion. You can read the parts in the article about being the adult in the room and so forth. ChatGPT misses the mark. Well, I'm going to end my rant on this whole thing here. I actually didn't think I would end up spending a whole episode on it. All the way back in episode number 1 of Satansplain, like I said there, Satanism is a RTFM religion. Read the fucking manual. But hopefully I've made my points, some of which I hope you found helpful. I know I learned something, especially about the limitations of ChatGPT. There's kindness to those who deserve it, and then there was this. Well, thank you all for listening, and until next time, hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at satansplain.com. And for more information about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2025, Magister Bill M.